Yes, I'm Sarah Jane, and I've been painting for about 6 years probably. Prior to that, I had a sort of career through my 20s really in arts management and running galleries, and I have a background in art theory and curatorial practice, and that was all mostly based in Australia when that was happening. And then I decided, once I moved to this country, to go back to painting, which has always been a love, but something I didn't do for a long time. And I decided to do portraiture because it seemed like the most difficult thing, actually, really. It seemed like a real challenge, and something that I still find very challenging, and that's why I continue to be engaged in it, because it's interesting and challenging. And I do think that life is very much about people and about being in relationship to people, and I find that really rich and fascinating territory to explore through paint. And I trained at the Heatherley School of Fine Art, which is in Chelsea. Some of you might know of it. A little school there that specialises in traditional portraiture, printmaking and sculpture. Anyway, so these are a few things that I actually did at the beginning of the year. They're small and on board. And I tend to paint, I like to have commissions ongoing if possible. That's great for a painter of any description. But I also like to make work for myself, generally that involves my friends, people who are close to me, and people who I respect and admire in some way. They often tend to be writers, artists, other creative people, and often also I have a lot of LGBTQI, the acronym lesbian, gays, bisexuals, trans, questioning and intersex. People in my social circle, I identify as lesbian, and I by default really have a lot of friends who are, and I these are people that I do tend to paint mostly. And I think it's really important, actually, in terms of visibility, that people from those communities are represented in something that can be seen as a quite conservative genre at times, portraiture. It's definitely got traditional associations, and I think visibility is really key there, and also, I think, interesting territory to explore in terms of double portraits, relationship dynamics, and all of that kind of thing. So these are a few friends of mine, again, small, on board. They're all about 20 by 25, and these were all done within the last year or so. This one actually is a while ago. That's perhaps 2011. A friend of mine, Nicole, and often people get mistaken for men in my pictures, and I usually have to explain that they're mostly androgynous women. And this is a friend of mine called Rowan. This is actually a small study, again on board, and it's for a much larger commissioned double portrait of her and her girlfriend, so which is not yet finished, so I don't have a picture of the finished piece. But that's been exhibited and sold, and often people do buy pictures of friends of mine. I take that as a massive compliment as a painter, because portraiture is a very particular thing to I think buy and to have in your home sometimes when it is a head and shoulders portrait of somebody that you don't necessarily know. So I think that's always encouraging. This is a very, very large painting. It's about 2 meters across, of a friend of mine called Brian, who I just really wanted to paint. And he was happy to pose for me nude, and I was happy to paint him nude. This one ended up being auctioned at Christie's just in March, actually, this year, for the Terence Higgins Trust, which is an organisation, some of you might know, that work to destigmatise issues around HIV, really. And that was really lovely to be able to sort of be part of that and help them raise money to do that work. I was very pleased to be asked. And this is a self-portrait, again, quite large. It's difficult to look at these sorts of things on a screen, but that's about 2 meters, well, 1.5 perhaps tall. And so I don't paint myself terribly often, so I was sort of fishing around for something to base it around, and kind of all the stuff in the background really is what was in my mind at the time, really. It's a lot about the body, actually, and vulnerability and violence. And some of you might recognise a few pictures in there. There's a Francis Bacon there, and there's a Matisse. I'd recently been to the Marlene Dumas exhibition, which was at the Tate Modern last year. So these pieces here are hers, and then the Richard Diebenkorn as well. And I've always been a big fan of Diebenkorn's work. Anyway, we'll crack on because it's... So this is a friend of mine called Stev B, who's sort of quite notorious in certain London circles, and she's a sort of a fabulous kind of, hard to describe Steph B. She's a fabulous sort of hostess, and she's a really charismatic, gregarious person who kind of brings people together really and hosts all sorts of pop-up events and cocktail evenings and film nights and all sorts of things. And she's always been a fabulous kind of supporter of my work, and I like her very much. And every time I see her, she's one of those people that puts a lot of effort into how she dresses. And every time I see her socially out, I just say, I've got to paint you, Steph, because she just looks immaculate always, and she's sort of got this particular style. And these are a couple of friends of mine, friends of friends probably more accurately. And again, a couple. And I saw that I work from photographs, which is can be unusual for a portrait painter. Lots of painters, especially the ones who you'll see out in the main galleries, work from life exclusively. And I was trained to paint from life, but I do like something about working from photographs these days. I find it a really useful distancing mechanism, and my work is increasingly quite graphic. And I think it provides kind of a one-step remove from the people in the image. And I do enjoy working from life. I think they're very different projects, really. And my work is becoming very much about making a painting, an image, and about the design of the image. And there's a simplification there, which I think photography is useful for. So this photo, I usually take my own photographs, but this one I found and asked if I could use to make a painting from. And so there's kind of, I've accentuated the distortion of the thing. It's also, again, quite large. There's something about it that I just liked, the fact that they're two women. I have had people assume that the one on the left is a bloke wearing a bra, which is it's not true. She's just fairly androgynous. But and they were living in Berlin at the time, and I was sort of fascinated by this dynamic. And anyway, it's this again is a huge painting. This was actually in the Royal Society of Portrait Painters show last year. Perhaps in 2014. I don't recall. Maybe last year. Anyway, friends of mine who are very close friends, and it's again sort of 150 squared, and there's something about their friendship really that made me want to paint them, and the aesthetics as well. Emma on the right is quite androgynous, and it's set in her flat. The very keen-eyed amongst you might note that in the top corner there's an invitation to the Royal Society of Portrait Painters for the year previous, which I thought was a nice try. I hope that's not the only reason I got in, but I thought that was quite a nice sort of circular thing. And also Australia and New Zealand are quite prominent on the globe, which I like to paint objects, and I like symbolism, and I like narrative, and so wherever I can get something in, I try to. And we come on to something a few of you might have seen, which is a portrait of my very lovely friends Harriet and Anushka, who happen to be with us today in the audience, which is a real treat for me. And Harriet and Anushka I was friends with before they commissioned me, and they've bought my work previously, which was lovely. And it's always nice as you're sort of starting out to have a bit of support like that, and to have people in your life who take note of what you're doing and who are generous and supportive, and they've always been that very much for me. So I was thrilled when they did commission me, and also, I mean, the commissioning process is endlessly fascinating, and I think we'll talk about that perhaps a bit more in depth with Annabelle shortly. But it can be it's a strange process, and it's like nothing else, I don't think. And I do love it because I work from photographs. I'm often in my studio on my own for days on end, and that can be a particular kind of internal landscape to deal with. And I find that commissioning really sort of tethers one to the world and to being in relationship with people, and it's a negotiation, it's a collaboration, and it's something that becomes present in the world that wouldn't have if people hadn't decided to be part of making something or to suggest making something. And it's really, I mean, I never know how things are going to turn out, and that's lovely. And it really is a process that sort of is quite natural and organic, and it kind of happens along the way. And I love it when people have some input as well, when they have a real sort of fixed idea of what they want included or how they want to be portrayed. And I very much see it as a collaborative process. And that's the biggest compliment for me, when people are enthusiastic enough and feel close enough to the project to want to see how it's going and have some input. I'm equally happy to sort of bash on with my own ideas. But this time I went around to take photographs of Harriet and Anushka, and they'd really put a lot of thought into what they wanted, and they'd chosen outfits. And oops, they had, would that come back on?
Yeah.
They'd also all the objects in the background, you can potentially go and have a closer look at the actual painting. But they're all quite significant objects. There's Harriet's a surgeon, and there's a surgeon's medal there, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, the ceramics, I think some of them were made by Harriet's mother. So we get the fact checking right. And there's all the books. Sort of, you know, they're deliberately there. A lot of the titles. Some of them I edited in, which I sort of reserve creative license to do so. I hope they don't mind. And there's a picture of them on their wedding day behind, and there's all sorts of kind of things in there. And one of the things I thought was really lovely when I turned up to take photographs was that they wanted to have this little print in, which was something I gave them. For they got married at Dulwich Picture Gallery, and that was the card that I gave them on the day. It was a little print of Dulwich Picture Gallery, so I thought that was quite, you know, I'm also sort of in there. And obviously their wedding rings feature quite prominently, and it's and I liked the sort of simplicity and formality of the thing. And when I was asked to do it, I was very, very excited by the whole project, and immediately, because I sort of have a vague knowledge about history and painting in particular, modernist painting and contemporary painting, I'd like to think, immediately all these ideas were sort of sparking off, and I was thinking in particular of two images of painters who I very much love and admire and respect. Roxana Halls. This is Roxana's. Roxana's a contemporary painter working out of a studio in Streatham, I think. And I've exhibited with her before. So, and this is her and her wife. I believe it's called A Portrait of the Artist and Her Wife. And so immediately I thought of, you know, the sort of similarities in that there's quite a formal pose, there's a symmetry there, there's an egalitarian aspect, and that sort of came to mind, as well as Sadie Lee's picture, which is called Erect. And some of you might have seen this, or might have it in your sort of cultural consciousness, as I think it was made in 1991. And it's a portrait of her and her then girlfriend, and it was it was in the BP Portrait Award at the time, and it was chosen to be the image for all of the sort of advertising, marketing and things, so it was up on the tube and everything. And again, the sort of formality and the frontalness of these two women was very much in my mind when I was thinking about making Harriet and Anushka's piece. And the last thing I wanted to show you was, I don't know how, this is a pencil drawing of my next commission. I don't know if you can make it out, but it's two guys who are florists, and yeah, it's a big thing. It's about 150 by 110, so not dissimilar to the size of Harriet and Anushka's painting. And I walked in, and I don't know Derek and Mark terribly well, but one of the first things Mark in particular said to me was, I've been thinking of Hockney's early portraits. And I was so chuffed, because I absolutely love Hockney's early portraits. And I immediately, you can see there's sort of in these chairs, and there's all these plants behind them as well, and that through the windows there's a very, very beautiful garden, and this sort of cactus and lamp and things. And I immediately thought of Hockney's painting of Christopher Isherwood and Don Baccardi from 1968, I think. And this kind of formality and this symmetry and this very sort of sparse of composition, actually, and the way that one of them is looking at the other. And so I like that there's a sort of coalescence to that. So yeah, but who knows how that will go? It could potentially be up here next year. Who knows? With any luck, but that's sort of about it.